Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. So today I have my sunglasses and I have my Pompano Joe's hat and I am ready to go outside and start cutting my lawn. I'll have more on the reasoning for that in just a second. So I'm cutting my lawn not because I have to, but because I want to. I used to have a guy that cut my lawn for me. He did a great job. In fact, he would bring his people here. One of them would mow, one of them would edge, one of them would blow the stuff off of the sidewalk. They would be out of here in between 10 to 12 minutes. They were literally the fastest lawn mowing people I've ever seen, and they did a great job. But his prices have increased almost 40% since we first started using him. Now, I don't blame him. He has to make money. And the only way for him to make money is to pay his expenses, and his expenses, including the gas to run his equipment, as well as the labor to operate his equipment, has done nothing but increase over the last 2 years. And as a result of that, he had to make changes. And so, even though I really appreciated the fact that he did an excellent job, it's just easier and better for me to cut my own lawn and save the about $900 a year that it would have cost me to have him do that. So by going outside and running the lawnmower, I am writing myself a check every year for $900. Let's be honest with one another. There is a recession coming. And several months ago, I put together a little bit of a presentation for some friends about how to deal with this, because many of the people who live in our neighborhood are on fixed incomes and don't have access to extra hours where they can work extra and make extra money. So I did a little presentation. I'm going to take pieces of that presentation and sort of spin them into this video, because I think it's important to note that a recession, while it can be awful for many people, is often an opportunity disguised as a problem. So we're going to take a look at some of the ways that you can deal with a really awful situation, a recession, in such a way that you come out better at the end of it than you did going in. The economic indicators all point toward a recession. We have inflation, we have unemployment, we have increased government spending. You've probably seen where Silicon Valley Bank went into receivership, First Republic went into receivership. There have been a number of banking crises, and I suspect they will continue. This is something that happened in the 2007 crisis. And the Federal Reserve has been steadily raising interest rates in order to stop the inflation. Now, none of this is news. If you've been following along the last couple of months, you know that there have been a number of things that have gone wrong in the economy, and that the government is ostensibly trying to set that right. While there is some disagreement about policy in terms of how that gets done, I don't doubt that there is a good faith effort to try and put the economy back on track. And the fact that it hasn't come back on track yet is not a sign that it's not ever going to. It simply means that it's going to take a little bit longer than it has so far. And while they are not currently calling this a recession is on the horizon. And as I said, all of the economic indicators point toward that. So there were recessions in the 1980s, the 1990s. The recession of 2000 was rather short-lived, but the Great Recession from 2007 through 2009 lasted more than 2 years. And it's important to note that that was caused by essentially a banking and insurance crisis and a crisis in subprime mortgages. They gave loans to people who should not have had them. When those loans defaulted, it very nearly brought down the entire economic system, there was something like a $700 billion bailout for the banks in order to prevent that collapse. But as you can see, there's a recession about every 10 years. This pattern of repeating recessions is nothing new. It dates back to the founding of the country. There have been panics and other things that have caused recessions and problems in the economy, and we've always been able to come through them okay. But knowing that these happen gives you a little bit of an indicator of what to do and how to analyze things so that you can profit from them in the situation where the economy goes to a down spiral. There are opportunities to make money there, and there are opportunities to make money when it comes out. But my tips are oriented more toward the survival aspect of it and the savings aspect of it so that you can, at the end of the recession, take advantage of some of those opportunities. Recessions are awful, but they are survivable. While people suffer during a recession, the end of that recession will always bring an opportunity for folks who are prepared to capitalize on it. It can wreck your financial health or it can improve it depending on what you do now before the recession fully hits. So here are some of my survival tactics. First of all, you cut non-essential services. That's why I'm mowing my own lawn. So even though it means a little bit of extra work for me, I cut that non-essential service so that I could spend money other places or save the money that I would ordinarily spend on that. The next thing we do is we set limits on discretionary spending. And when we do engage in discretionary spending, we try to be thoughtful about it. Now, you can run down to the Quick Trip or the QT or the Circle K, and you can pay $2.25 for a big Diet Coke, right? It's certainly possible. But I would challenge any of you to tell me that you can tell the difference between that and a can of Sam's Diet Cola. I can't taste the difference between the two, and I can't see paying the difference between the two. So in terms of discretionary spending, if I'm going to spend money on pop, and we don't do that very often because, frankly, we really like to drink iced tea, and iced tea is a lot cheaper, we use our good common sense and get something, because if you can't taste the difference, why should you pay the difference? We look at what we've spent in the last couple of months, and we try very hard to reduce every month by about 10%. One of the quickest ways that you can do that is to limit the number of meals that you eat out. If you do eat out, go to less expensive restaurants. I'll give you a good example of that. We went to Five Guys here in Miramar Beach, and 2 hamburgers and 2 French fries several months ago was over $35. You can go and buy a pound of ground beef and a bag of frozen French fries for a lot less money than that. So we don't go to Five Guys. If we're going to have a hamburger somewhere, we'll go someplace like Whataburger or McDonald's, because we're not going for the best hamburger experience. We're going to preserve our capital, to save money on things that in the long run don't matter. So go to the less expensive restaurants. Eat less expensive entrees. Recently, an Egg McMuffin has increased to over $4 at McDonald's, but you can often find sausage biscuits for $1.50, and the difference in terms of how well they fill you up is minimal. So again, you can eat the less expensive entrees, and every time you do that, it's like writing yourself a check for the difference. I've probably said this before, but the difference between a war story and a fairy tale is that a fairy tale starts off once upon a time, and a war story starts off, you're not going to believe this, but. Well, you're not going to believe this, but here's the war story. My wife and I grew up with military parents, and people who were in the military during the 1960s and 1970s, they did not have a lot of money. They made do on military paychecks, and they pinched a penny until Lincoln screamed. That's what I'll tell you. My mom could make almost anything out of almost nothing. I was always amazed at what she could put together for dinner out of a cabinet that didn't have very much in it. But we also did other things to economize. Our extended family lived in Missouri, and we were stationed in Colorado. So we would make 2 or 3 trips back every summer, usually over long weekends, to see family and to go to things like family reunions. So my father believed very strongly in driving as long and as fast as he possibly could. In fact, he used to tell us that you get emptied out when the car gets filled up, to encourage us not to have too much to drink with lunch and dinner, that kind of thing. When you go from Colorado to Missouri, you have no choice but to go through the vast wasteland of Kansas, where really the only way you know that you're actually going anywhere is because you have to change radio stations, because the scenery is all the same. Well, during those long trips, the deal was, we got to stop to go to the bathroom at rest areas, and at those rest areas, we would pull out the cooler and we would eat bologna on white bread. Or sometimes, if we were feeling particularly good, we would get ham sandwiches or ham and cheese sandwiches. And sometimes just cheese sandwiches. But we ate those sandwiches and we thought they were wonderful because they were good food. And it was a lot cheaper to do that than to stop at restaurants along the way. So several years ago, during the height of the pandemic, we would have to travel to Florida, and we did not want to eat at restaurants. And the reason we didn't want to eat at restaurants is because the only way that you can eat in a restaurant is to take your mask off, and people were absolutely hideous about coughing in restaurants. So what we did was, we did what our mom and dads did during the 1960s and 1970s. We made sandwiches, we stuck them in a cooler, and then we'd pull off at a rest area, drop the tailgate on our truck, and we'd sit back on our truck with our dogs on leashes, running around doing what dogs do, and we would eat our sandwiches in picnic format. We saved a lot of money that way in terms of not having to go to restaurants. We didn't think of it in terms of trying to save money. We thought of it in terms of trying to avoid contact with people who might be infected. But the effect of that was to greatly reduce the amount of money we spent on meals out. The bottom line is, you try everything you can to save. You want to save as much as you can, reduce your discretionary spending. When you get $500 or $600 together that you have saved, stick it in a 3 to a 9 month certificate of deposit. There are a couple of reasons for this. First, it locks that money in and you can't touch it for that period of time. So if you have a habit of breaking your bank open every time you want something, it's a really great idea to stick money into certificates of deposit, because it prohibits binge spending. It's not available. And you get a higher interest rate on a certificate of deposit than you will on a savings account. The next thing, of course, is to limit your credit card purchases. You want to use credit cards for convenience, not for discretionary spending. You want to pay off the cards at the end of the month, and you don't want to carry a balance that you pay interest on. A little known fact that a lot of people ignore, I think, is that by carrying a balance on your MasterCard or your Visa card, you're paying somebody for the privilege of using their money. And the amount of money that you have as a minimum monthly payment does not even come close to reducing the overall amount that you owe. Many times all it does is pay the interest on the amounts that you have already accumulated. And so it's easy to get way behind on credit cards, and that tends to be the kind of thing that winds up driving people into bankruptcy, because once you default on a credit card payment, they jack your interest rate up, sometimes up to 21, 23%. If you go get one of these visas that's out of South Dakota or Arkansas, a lot of times the credit rate and the credit interest rate in those cases is 21, 23, sometimes 25, pretty close to 25%. It's not actually at 25, but it's pretty close to 25%. And the reason you're paying that is because you missed one payment. And of course, that means that the entire balance is now subject to that percentage rate, and it's almost impossible by making the minimum monthly payment to pay off your balance. So you have to pay it off in larger chunks. You never want to use a credit card as a way of financing purchases. The best way to finance a purchase is to save the money in advance and then make the purchase. Because if you put it on a credit card, the tendency is to leave it on a credit card. And then when you want to go on vacation, you think, well, I've got a $5,000 credit limit. I've only got $2,000 on there. We can put the vacation on the credit card and pay it off later. Well, the problem is a lot of times people don't pay it off later. So you have to be very, very careful about how you use credit cards. This also has an effect of limiting your discretionary spending. If you know you're not going to have money at the end of the month to pay the bill, if you use the credit card to buy that thing you want at Best Buy, then you're probably not going to buy it. Here is another tip. Cancel recurring charges on your credit cards. The day after tax day, every year, we go through the printout that we get from American Express. We get a printout at the end of every year that has all of our charges that we made on our cards. And we go through that not only for the purposes of preparing our taxes, but we also go through it to look for recurring charges. For example, this year, I realized that I stopped using Norton last year, and I was still paying Norton for services that I'm not getting. I don't use that software. So it didn't make a lot of sense to continue to pay for services that I'm not receiving. Eliminate those kinds of things. Eliminate redundancy. We used to take the newspaper. We no longer take the newspaper. Many newspapers have a deal where you can take the digital newspaper for much less money. I think in Opelika the difference is about $10 a month in terms of using the digital newspaper instead of the print newspaper. Of course, that's also good for the environment. It reduces the amount of paper. But in fact, you really don't need a newspaper. You can use the internet and get the news off of the internet every day a lot less expensively than you can paying your local newspaper. And of course, you also avoid all of those ads that may induce you to binge spending. Eliminate unused memberships. If you have a Sam's Club card and a Costco card, why do you need both? If you like one store or the other more and you go more to that store than the other, eliminate the unused membership. Go to the store that you like. If at all possible, get down to one car. And if you can't get down to one car, drive one car as much as possible. And that is something that I think is really important if you want to save money. An important tip if you have an electric vehicle, and we have a Kia EV6, an electric vehicle, it is possible sometimes to get a special rate on your electric bill by virtue of having that electric vehicle. You may have to call the power company and apply for it, but generally speaking, it's a much better rate than you would get otherwise. So that's another way you can save money. What's the purpose of all this belt tightening? Well, first of all, it prevents financial catastrophe if you wind up losing your job. And it gives you a savings cushion if you have an emergency that's not covered by insurance, for example. Your roof blows off, or you break your leg and you don't have suitable insurance, health insurance to cover that. These are things that a savings cushion can help you get through. In addition, it is great training for your children. You know, the way I learned to conserve money and be frugal was by watching my mom and dad squeeze a military paycheck to great advantage. But most importantly, it positions you to exploit opportunities when the recession comes to an end. This next part that follows, I'm not bragging that I have a house in Florida. I'm just trying to explain to you how it is that you can position yourself to be ready to take advantage of a downturn in the economy if you are frugal during that downturn. In 2009, we had managed to amass a savings, a significant amount, several $100,000, over the course of the few years before. Every time we got extra money, we stuck it in a CD, and then we rolled those CDs over, and the CDs came due in February of 2009. We took the money out, and we came down to Miramar Beach, And a lot of people who had become sort of upside down with their mortgages were now looking to find a way to get out of that situation. And we were able to buy a house with deeded beach access for $225,000. Now it needed work, and we fixed a lot of things, and we wound up having to remodel a lot of things. But the house that we bought is now worth $750,000. And that was a huge investment that we were able to make because we had saved money religiously during the catastrophe of the 2007 to 2009 recession. And here's another really important tip. Understand the psychology that is involved here. Spending money makes you feel good. You get a little endorphin hit whenever you spend money. Oh boy, I got something I really, really wanted. And then about a week later, you're looking at the thing that you got that's really, really cool, and you realize, I really didn't need to spend that money. So be careful about your spending and be careful about how you feel. If you have a really good deal, if you see a really good deal at Best Buy and you want that light or that speaker or whatever it is, or that big screen TV, walk away. Go take 20 minutes to decide whether or not you really need it, because you may need that money that you're getting ready to spend somewhere down the road for something that is more important. Now, when you get to the end of the month and you have money left over from your paycheck that you're going to push into a savings account or into a CD, reward yourself. Reward yourself with a date night with your spouse. Reward yourself with a home-cooked meal that you wouldn't ordinarily make. One of the things that I make for my wife is something called shrimp Destin, which is a great little dish that we learned about down here in Florida. And so I will make that, and we'll have a nice quiet dinner where we eat shrimp that we wouldn't ordinarily eat. We don't eat that every week. We reward our frugality with little gifts to ourselves like that in order to champion the frugality that we cherish in terms of putting money back so that we will have it if we need it down the road. Now, I know that some people will say that this level of frugality is ridiculous and unnecessary. It's also unpleasant sometimes to have to make choices that you would not ordinarily make in order to save a little bit of money. But you never know what's coming down the road. And that's particularly true when the recession is sort of on the horizon. You never know how bad it's going to get. The people who were blown away by the Great Depression in 1929 never saw it coming. And that lasted for several years, and it ruined a lot of lives. I mean, people jumped out of building windows in New York City when that happened. And I don't want any of you guys jumping out of building windows. So you may choose not to do the things that we do. You may choose not to be as radical as we are in terms of saving money. And that's absolutely fine. You should do what is comfortable for you. But be aware that at the end of the recession, there will be people who are in dire financial straits who need to get out of those dire financial straits. And if you want to improve the quality of your life going forward, you may have opportunities then, particularly investment opportunities in stocks, that sort of thing, that you don't have going into a recession if all you do is work very hard to conserve the money that you have. So that's what I have for you today. It's a little different than my usual stuff in terms of legal content, but hopefully you have found it useful or helpful. And maybe I've given you some ideas about saving money that you hadn't thought of yourself. Now, if you have ideas that you use to save money, I would love to see you put them in the comments down below, because you may be able to help other people who have similar issues. And that's especially true because I have one of the brightest group of subscribers in the entire country, and I know that you guys use a lot of different tactics to save money where you can. So again, please feel free to share those tactics in the comments down below. I would love that. That is a kindness that only you can do, and I would so much appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a terrific day, and you know what? Time to go mow the lawn. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.